Through practical strategies and actionable steps, Out the Mud teaches you how to build inner strength, tap into your full potential, and take control of your future. This book provides the tools to shift your mindset and take deliberate steps towards success, happiness, and self-empowerment. Out the Mud proves that, no matter where you come from, the power to shape your destiny lies within you. Out the Mud Strategies of Triumph and Growth, written by Almighty Tazzo. Chapter 1. Growth. Growing up in one of Chicago's most dangerous neighborhoods, I didn't have the luxury of pretending life was easy. There was no space for naive optimism, no time to believe that the world would just give me a chance. I was thrown into a reality where gunshots weren't an anomaly, they were the soundtrack of our lives. The violence that rained down upon my neighborhood didn't just come from external forces, it was in the air, woven into the fabric of everyday existence. It wasn't just the external threats that shaped my world, it was the internal ones too. Surrounded by lack, the idea of a fruitful future seemed impossible to even dream about. The weight of the environment I lived in pressed down on me every single day. The streets seemed to tell me that there was only one way out, to become part of the cycle, rather than escape it. There were days when I thought that maybe that was all I was meant for, to fall in line, to become one more person swallowed up by the system of violence and poverty that defined so many lives. But deep inside, there was a flicker of something different, something more. I often felt trapped by my circumstances, suffocated by the feeling that the walls around me were closing in. I would look at others around me, people who had given up on dreams, lost their faith, people who had resigned themselves to the violence and the chaos, and I wondered if I would become like them. It was hard to see a way out when the path seemed so unclear, and every effort to rise above the circumstances was met with resistance. It was easy to believe that the deck was stacked against me, that somehow I was just another statistic in the making, destined for a life of struggle and hardship. But despite all of that, it was in this very environment that I learned some of the most valuable lessons of my life. There's a certain kind of strength you can only find when your back is against the wall, when you have no choice but to fight. If you can grow in a place where the odds are stacked against you, where violence is a constant threat, where opportunity feels like a distant dream, then you can grow anywhere. In the end, I was forged into something stronger. The uncertainty, the violence, and heartache became the crucible that tested my will, my resilience, and my determination to live life on my own terms. And though I didn't always see it at the time, these trials became the building blocks of my transformation. I now know that the hardest experiences can become the most powerful teachers, but only if you're willing to learn from them. Each setback held lessons if I was willing to learn from them. I didn't always learn the lessons right away. Sometimes it took hitting rock bottom before I could see the truth in the pain. Sometimes it meant sitting in the darkness, questioning everything, before the light of understanding opened my eyes. But over time, I learned that the pain wasn't permanent. It was the kind of thing that shaped you. This book isn't just about becoming the best version of yourself in some abstract. It's about becoming the best version of yourself despite the challenges, obstacles, and setbacks that life throws at you. It's about the grit it takes to rise from the ashes when everything is trying to pull you back down. And let me tell you, if you can make it out of a place where opportunity feels like a distant dream and where fear is a constant companion, then you can truly unlock your potential in ways you never thought possible. I've walked that path. I've survived it. And I can tell you now that the person you become after facing down the rugged parts of life is a version of yourself that is more capable, more powerful, and more determined than you ever imagined. But here's the thing, none of this happened overnight. It took time, it took faith and persistence. It took a deep, unshakable belief that I could fight for my future, even when the odds seemed stacked against me. There were days when I felt like I was walking through mud, every step heavier than the last, every moment filled with doubt. But those days, as tough as they were the ones that taught me to persevere. They taught me that success isn't about immediate results or instant gratification. It's about showing up day after day. That's the thing about growth. It isn't linear. There's no straight line from point A to point B. There's no one-size-fits-all blueprint for becoming the best version of yourself. But there is one truth that will always apply. You have to be willing to put in the work. It took time for me to realize that. It took time for me to understand that I had to keep pushing forward, even when life kept knocking me down. I had to learn to take every setback, every hardship, and use it as fuel for my God-given fire. I couldn't afford to be discouraged by the circumstances I was born into. I had to take what life handed me and turn it into something that worked for me rather than against me. It wasn't easy, and there were days when I didn't know if I had it in me. But slowly, surely, I began to see the cracks in the walls I had built around myself. I began to see that if I kept moving, I could break through them, so I did. And now, looking back on that journey, I can honestly say that everything I went through, every hardship, every challenge, every moment of doubt, all of it was worth it. Because in the end, those experiences made me who I am today. This book is my way of showing you that no matter where you start, no matter how difficult your circumstances may seem, there is always a way forward. And with patience, determination, and the right mindset, you too can become the best version of yourself, no matter what life throws at you. Chapter 2. Surviving, 𝗖𝑠 and Living. Growing up in a neighborhood plagued by gun violence, I didn't always think about self-improvement. Each day presented a new challenge, a new obstacle to overcome, just to make it through the day. It wasn't about ambition or dreams. In a place where danger lurked around every corner, where the harsh realities of life were always knocking on your door, every decision was made through the lens of survival. I learned this lesson early, and it became ingrained in me. It wasn't just about protecting yourself physically. It was also about protecting your mental and emotional state. The streets were unforgiving. People didn't show mercy to those who were weak, who were easily intimidated, or who lacked the ability to defend themselves. It was a place where you had to be tough. Tough enough to endure the constant barrage of hardship, tough enough to stand your ground. But that toughness, that need to survive, left little room for self-improvement or growth. There simply wasn't time for it. The pressing need to get through each day kept any other aspirations buried deep inside. I remember watching my friends get caught in the crossfire of gang wars, young lives full of promise and potential, cut short by a senseless bullet, a fleeting moment of violence. Some were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, while others had made choices that led them down a darker path. Either way, it didn't matter. In the end, it was all the same. Another life lost, another story left unfinished. The grief of losing someone you care about becomes a familiar companion in an environment like that. After a while, you get used to the feeling of loss. It's like a shadow that always follows you, no matter how far you try to run from it. I remember the first time I lost someone close to me. It was a moment frozen in time, one I'll never forget. Seeing someone lose their life in such a violent, unnecessary way is something that can't be explained. It's something you have to live through to understand. There was nothing I could do to change it, nothing I could say to bring them back. The finality of death, especially in a place where it feels like it could happen to anyone at any time, can be overwhelming. Those are the kinds of moments that break people, or they can make them stronger. For me, it was the latter. In that moment of profound grief, I made a decision deep within myself. I refused to let this define me. I refused to let the streets, the violence, and the pain rob me of the life I knew I was capable of living. I wasn't going to become another statistic, another face in the crowd of lost potential. I wasn't going to fall into the trap that so many before me had fallen into, giving up, resigning myself to the belief that this was all there was. The streets were full of people who had given up, people who had allowed the violence and chaos around them to define who they were. They had resigned themselves to a life where survival was the goal, and anything beyond that peace, joy, success seemed unattainable. I saw it every day. People who had stopped fighting for themselves, people who no longer believed there was any way out. But deep down, I knew there had to be more to life than just surviving. I knew that life could be different, that there was more for me beyond the confines of the neighborhood. The hardest lesson I learned was that survival isn't enough. You have to want to thrive. Surviving is just getting by, it's not living. And I knew, deep down, that I was capable of more than just getting by. The desire to thrive, to grow beyond the pain and the violence that surrounded me, was what pushed me forward. I wanted to see beyond the narrow scope of my circumstances. I wanted to create a life that was mine, one that wasn't dictated by fear, one where I had control over my future. But the truth is, that kind of thinking was a challenge in itself. In a place where survival was the focus, thriving seemed like an unattainable dream, like something for other people, people who didn't have to deal with the daily reality of the streets. But I refused to accept that. I wasn't willing to accept that my environment had to define my life. I had seen enough people become prisoners of their own circumstances, watching them grow bitter and angry, settling for less than they deserved. And while I understood the temptation to do so, to just give in and accept the world as it was, I knew it wasn't the path for me. If I allowed myself to fall into that mindset, I knew I'd be just like everyone else who had given up, who had let their dreams die in the chaos. In hindsight, I realized that I was learning valuable lessons even in the midst of the chaos, lessons that I didn't fully understand at the time. Resilience, strength, patience, the ability to see beyond your immediate environment. These lessons were being carved into me by the circumstances I lived in, whether I realized it or not. And it wasn't just the violence I had to overcome. It was also the psychological weight of living in a place where the future felt uncertain, where every day was a battle. But through it all, I held on to something, the belief that I could create something better for myself. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't fast. There were moments when I wondered if I was fighting a losing battle. But then I'd remember the people I'd lost, the friends who didn't make it out, and I'd find the strength to keep going. I wasn't going to let their deaths be in vain. I wasn't going to let the streets win. The reality of growing up in an environment like mine can break most people. The constant threat of violence, the loss of loved ones, the overwhelming sense of misfortune, it can make you numb. But it can also make you vigorous. It can make you realize that you have the power to decide who you will become, no matter how harsh your environment. While the road to thriving wasn't clear at first, and it didn't always feel like I was making progress, I knew I had to keep going. Thriving wasn't just about escaping my environment, it was about transcending it, about creating something new out of the wreckage. When you grow up surrounded by danger and scarcity, it's easy to start believing that your fate is sealed, that the struggles, the poverty, the violence, the hopelessness, it's all just a part of who you are. When you're constantly surrounded by the harshness of life, it can feel like there's no way out. Whether it's the media constantly showing you a version of your neighborhood filled with crime and despair, or the people around you who have simply given up, it's easy to internalize the idea that this is your destiny, that this is the life you're supposed to lead. You begin to see the world through a lens of limitation. The walls feel high, and the doors seem locked. And for many, it's easier to accept that than to try to fight against it. You're told, in subtle and not so subtle ways, that people like you will never be more than your environment. People like you aren't for anything better than what you already have. It's hard not to internalize that messaging, especially when you're surrounded by people who have settled, people who've stopped believing that things could be different. You see it in the way they talk, in the way they move through life, in the way they no longer expect anything beyond the immediate struggle. It's as if the dream of something more is a luxury that they, and by extension, you, can't afford. At some point, something inside me clicked. I had to make a conscious choice to do the hard things. The easy route would have been to just accept things as they were, to fall in line with the expectations of the world around me, to let the weight of my circumstances decide for me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the life I wanted. I began to realize that shifting my mindset was the first and most important step in changing my life. It's one thing to survive, it's another thing to live. Survival is about getting through the hardest times. It's about breathing through the pain, enduring the violence, the loss, the uncertainty. It's about navigating each day without falling apart, without losing yourself. Survival is necessary when you're in a war zone, when life feels like a constant battle, but survival alone isn't enough. Living, on the other hand, that's what gives you purpose. That's what makes you get up in the morning and keep going when the world feels like it's crumbling around you. Purpose is what gives life meaning. And once I started to understand that, I realized that I didn't have to be trapped in a cycle of survival. I could choose to live, to step beyond mere existence, and strive for something greater. Chapter 3. Breaking the Cycle. It wasn't idealism that drove me, though. Idealism can feel like a distant dream when you're living in the middle of chaos. What I did have was a vigorous determination. A determination to break free from the cycle of violence that had claimed so many around me. I couldn't change the past. I couldn't erase the violence, the trauma, or the generational struggles that seemed to define my community. But what I could control, what I could take ownership of, was my future. That's where I began. It wasn't an instant transformation. It didn't happen overnight. I started small. Every day, I made the choice to do just one thing that would take me closer to where I wanted to be. If I had a book or article, I read it. If I had the chance to learn a new skill, I seized it. If there was a job, any job, I took it. I worked odd jobs. Jobs that didn't always make sense or seem glamorous. But that didn't matter to me. Every dollar earned, every skill learned, every book read, it was all a step forward. It wasn't about the big leap. It was about the consistent, steady steps. But more than anything, I focused on what was within my control. And, surprisingly, that was a lot more than I thought. I couldn't control my environment, my circumstances, or the people around me, but I could control my attitude. I could choose how I responded to adversity, how I carried myself through the difficulties I faced. I could choose my actions, whether I gave in to fear and anger, or whether I chose to act with purpose and intention. And most importantly, I could control my choices. Every day, I made decisions that aligned with my long-term goals, even when they seemed insignificant at the time. In the neighborhood I grew up in, uncertainty was a constant companion. Everything about life felt fragile, like it could fall apart at any moment. That uncertainty bred fear, but it also taught me something valuable. If you want something better, you have to take it for yourself. No one is coming to rescue you. There is no one riding in on a white horse to pull you out of the chaos and the pain. No one is going to hand you the life you want, especially when you're coming from a place where people don't expect you to succeed. It's on you to make the change. And I realized, finally, that I had to be the one to make that change. The path wouldn't clear just because I wished it. The change would happen through my effort, through my willingness to do the work, even when the road was steep and the progress felt slow. It was a hard truth to swallow, but once I accepted it, it became the fuel that powered my journey. The understanding that I was the only one who could change my life became my motivation. And the more I took responsibility for my own future, the more I realized that it was possible to change not just my own circumstances, but the lives of those around me. If I could break the cycle, then maybe others could too. The road to self-improvement is never straight, never without bumps or setbacks, but it's a road worth traveling. I began to see that life could be better, not just for me, but for anyone willing to put in the work. Chapter 4. You can't afford to give up. Gun violence was, unfortunately, something we grew up with, something so ingrained in the environment that it became almost impossible to imagine life without it. The streets, the corners, the alleys, they weren't just places where people walked or gathered. They were war zones, constantly marked by the sounds of sirens and gunshots. But the thing is, the violence didn't just exist on the surface. It wasn't just the gunshots ringing out at night or the constant threats of danger that you had to live with. The violence seeped into everything. It affected the way people interacted with each other, the way we built relationships, the choices people made, and the way we viewed the world. There were moments when we looked at each other and saw something different, something hard and jaded. The trauma we lived through wasn't always visible, but it was there, embedded in our behaviors, in our choices, and in the way we carried ourselves. It was an oppressive force that seemed to dictate the flow of our lives. You couldn't walk down the street without feeling its weight on your shoulders. You couldn't trust your neighbors completely. Vulnerability felt like a liability. Fear dictated where you went and who you talked to. In many ways, it was a silent force that forced its way into our very souls, altering our sense of self, our futures, and the way we saw the possibilities of life outside the violence. I remember, more than once, feeling like I was drowning in it. But in the middle of that darkness, I found something even more powerful: resilience. It wasn't something that came easily, and it definitely wasn't something my environment handed me. The streets didn't nurture resilience. In the midst of it all, I had to learn how to build it for myself, how to find strength when there didn't seem to be any left. Resilience was something I had to consciously create in my mind and soul, because the environment wasn't going to give it to me. The pressure of constantly worrying about the grief of losing people I loved and the uncertainty of each day were all weighing me down. There were moments when I wanted to just let go, when I wanted to throw in the towel and say, "What's the point?" But it was in those moments, when I thought about quitting, that I realized I couldn't afford to. I couldn't afford to give up. The streets, as unforgiving as they were, weren't going to decide who I became. They couldn't. I had to decide for myself. Every time I lost someone to violence, it felt like a part of me was taken too. Each loss reminded me that life is fragile. It's easy to take life for granted when you're not facing constant danger. But in that environment, you're forced to reckon with the preciousness of life every single day. Losing people, whether friends, family, or just people you knew from the neighborhood, became a reminder that nothing is guaranteed, that every day you live is a gift, and that you can't waste it. It's a lesson you learn early, whether you want to or not. There were times when I thought about giving up, but even in those darkest moments, something inside me fought back. I wasn't going to be another statistic. Every time I picked myself up after a setback, every time I pushed through the pain, the grief, and the overwhelming fear, I became stronger. Resilience wasn't about never falling down. It was about how many times you get back up. It was about refusing to stay down, even when everything around you is telling you to give up. Every small victory, the days I kept my head high despite the circumstances, the days I took another step forward, built my resilience. Slowly but surely, I started to realize that the fight was worth it for the life I wanted to live. In the face of constant adversity, I had to learn the hardest lesson of all. The only way out is through. There's no shortcut, no quick fix. You can't bypass the tough moments or the struggles. You can't just skip to the good part. Life, especially a life shaped by hardship, doesn't allow you to sidestep the journey. It forces you to face it head-on. And there were times when it felt like there was no way forward, like the road had ended. But what I came to understand is that that's exactly where the growth happens. It's in those moments, when it feels like everything is against you, that you have to choose to keep going. When you don't see a way out, and the walls are closing in, it's easy to let the weight of the situation crush you. But resilience teaches you that you don't have to have everything figured out right away. You just have to keep moving, one step at a time, even when it feels impossible. Real growth comes from the struggle, from the perseverance, and from pushing through when everything inside you wants to quit. I wasn't just fighting to survive. I was fighting for something more. I wasn't fighting just for my own life. I was fighting to live, to grow, and to be someone who could break free from the chains that had held so many of us in that cycle of despair. I wanted to be someone who could make it out. I wanted to show others that it was possible, that even when the world tells you no, even when your circumstances seem to close every door, you can still find a way. I realized that resilience wasn't just a trait, it was a choice to keep fighting, a choice to refuse to let my circumstances define me, a choice to rise above, no matter how many times I got knocked down. And that's what allowed me to make it through, to show others that they too had the power to rise, to overcome, and to create a life beyond the violence and pain. I knew that if I could make it out of that darkness, so could others. Chapter 5. Your comfort zone is killing you. In my neighborhood, you became hyper-aware of your surroundings. Every noise made you tense up. Every person who passed by you became a potential threat, and every decision, even a small one, felt weighted with the risk of something going wrong. But the worst part was the constant uncertainty. It wasn't just about the visible threats like the violence in the streets or the gangs that controlled certain corners. It was the fear of the unknown, the anxiety of never knowing what could happen next. But rather than running from my fear, I chose to confront it head-on. I learned that fear, while a natural response to danger, didn't have to control me. It was something I could face, something I could learn from, rather than something that would paralyze me. I had a choice. I could let the fear dictate my actions, let it shrink my world and keep me stuck, or I could find a way to use it to propel myself forward. Fear can be paralyzing. Instead of allowing fear to dictate my actions, I began to see it as a signal, a warning, yes, but also a signal that I was stepping into something that mattered. When I felt fear, it meant I was pushing my boundaries, stepping out of my comfort zone, and entering a space where growth could happen. Each time I encountered a situation that instilled fear within me, whether it was making a decision that could have significant implications for my future, trying new things I wasn't used to doing, or simply standing up for myself in the face of adversity, I grew stronger. Fear, I realized, wasn't a wall that would stop me. It was fuel for my drive. It became the catalyst that pushed me to take action, to be better, to fight harder. In the most dangerous moments, when my heart would race, I chose to move forward anyway. Because each time I stepped into the unknown, each time I faced the fear and pushed through it, I was reshaping my destiny. My ability to handle it, to channel it, and my ability to break free from my comfort zone grew stronger. Through this, I learned one of the most important lessons of all. True growth happens when you step into the unknown. It's when you push past your fears and take that first uncertain step towards something greater. That's when you begin to unlock your potential. I've always said that growth doesn't happen in your comfort zone. Growth happens in those moments when you choose to move forward, even when everything around you tells you to turn back. When you choose to rise above the fear and the uncertainty, you begin to realize how strong you really are. For me, stepping into the unknown meant taking risks. Risks in my personal life, risks in my decisions about education, work, and even relationships. It meant choosing to believe in something better than the environment I had grown up in. It meant not letting the darkness of my surroundings define who I would become. If I could grow in a place where fear was a constant, then I knew that fear didn't have to be a barrier. It could be a tool, a weapon in my arsenal. If I could take the fear that surrounded me every day, the fear that told me I was destined to fail, and use it to fuel my desire to be better, then I knew I could overcome any obstacle. Fear could only hold power over me if I allowed it. I began to understand that the most powerful way to confront fear is not by avoiding it, but by standing firm in the face of it and choosing to keep moving forward. Fear doesn't go away. It will always be there in one form or another. But what changes is your ability to handle it, to move through it, and to learn from it. Fear will always be a part of the journey, but it no longer has to dictate the destination. Chapter 6. You aren't alone. Even in an environment like mine, I learned the value of community. In my neighborhood, survival often meant keeping your guard up, trusting only a select few, and learning to read people quickly, because trust could be a dangerous thing to give away too freely. Everyone seemed to be driven by their own survival instincts, and in such a place, it was easy to believe that people couldn't be trusted. You had to watch your back at all times. But despite the harsh realities around me, I began to realize something that would change my perspective. Real growth happens when you allow others to support you. At first, it was hard to let go of my skepticism, to open myself up to the possibility that there were people who genuinely wanted to see me succeed. But over time, I understood that true progress isn't just about fighting through things on your own. It's about recognizing when you need help and letting others in. Whether it was family, a mentor, or a few close friends who understood what I was going through, those relationships became the foundation upon which I built my growth. It wasn't easy. Trust had to be earned, and there were moments when I questioned whether I could rely on anyone but myself. My environment had taught me that people often disappoint you, that loyalty was fleeting, and that in the end, you could only depend on your own strength. But in the quiet moments, when I would sit with someone who genuinely cared, I started to see a different picture. I began to see that community isn't just about who's in your corner during the good times. It's about having the courage to ask for help in the right places. These relationships, those connections with people who believed in me, growing toward the same goal in life, became valuable. There were times when I thought I was alone in my struggle. I would feel like the weight of the world was on my shoulders, wondering if anyone could possibly understand my desire to rise above my circumstances. I felt isolated in my ambitions, as though I was the only one who wanted more out of life. But the truth is, no one succeeds alone. No matter where you come from, no matter how hard you try to fight your battles by yourself, you need people who will hold you accountable, cheer you on, and when necessary, remind you of your worth. Accountability is everything. It's so easy to let go of your goals when no one is watching, when there's no one to remind you why you started in the first place. The temptation to give up is strong, especially when you're facing so many challenges. But the right people, those who have your best interests at heart, will keep you grounded. They'll be the ones who encourage you when you're ready to quit, who call you out when you're slacking, and who help you see your potential when you've lost sight of it yourself. They won't let you settle for less than you're capable of becoming, and they'll remind you that your dreams are worth fighting for. Sometimes, community isn't just about the people who directly support you. It's about the people you don't want to become. This was something I saw clearly in my neighborhood, where the consequences of giving in to despair were all around me. I saw the effects of people who had stopped fighting, stopped striving, and simply accepted the life they were given. It wasn't just about falling into the trap of violence and crime. It was about losing faith altogether. People would get stuck in a cycle of poverty, of addiction, or of violence, believing that it was the only reality they could ever know. And those who didn't make it out, those who got swallowed up by the very environment that once defined them, served as a constant reminder of what could happen if I didn't take control of my future. I knew that I had to make a choice. I could either become another statistic, another person who gave in to the narrative that life would always be a struggle, or I could make the decision to fight, to find a way to rise above. The people who didn't make it out weren't just victims of their environment. They were victims of their own mindset. I realized that if I wanted a better life, I had to be intentional about who I surrounded myself with and what I allowed to influence me. Community, in its best form, is a mirror. The people who are around you shape you, and you, in turn, shape them. So I began to surround myself with those who were doing the work, those who were trying to move forward. And I kept the faces of those who didn't make it out close to my heart as a constant reminder. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for something bigger, fighting for my community, for a life that would prove that breaking free was possible. In the end, I realized that my survival was no longer enough. I needed growth, I needed purpose, and I needed people who could help me achieve those things. I couldn't do it alone, and that was the greatest lesson of all. You are not alone. You don't have to carry the weight of your past, your circumstances, or your fears alone. There are people out there who will walk with you through the struggle and who will cheer for you when you succeed. But first, you have to trust that they exist. Chapter 7. Holding on to hope. Even after all of the hardship, I found that hope was the thing that kept me going. In the darkest moments, when it felt like life was nothing but a series of setbacks and obstacles, hope became my lifeline. It wasn't just a vague, abstract idea. Hope became a powerful, driving force that kept me from giving up when everything around me seemed determined to drag me down. Hope isn't about denying the difficulties in your life. It's not about pretending that everything is fine when you're surrounded by chaos and uncertainty. Hope is the ability to believe that, despite the circumstances, something better exists on the other side of the struggle. Hope, for me, became an internal compass, a belief that there was a way out, even when the road ahead was fogged with doubt. Hope is the belief that there's something better waiting for you if you're willing to keep going. It's the quiet confidence that tells you, no matter how many times you fall, you can get back up again. That no matter how many doors slam in your face, there's always another path to explore. It's that whisper in your soul that says, "This is not the end." Hope gave me the strength to keep fighting, even when the odds seemed impossible. The problem with hardship is that it has a way of narrowing your focus. When you're in the midst of struggle, it's easy to lose sight of anything beyond the immediate pain. But hope is what allows you to lift your head up and see a bigger picture. It's the vision of a future where your potential is no longer defined by the violence, fear, or scarcity that surrounded you in your past. Hope gave me the ability to look beyond my current circumstances and envision a future where I could grow, where I could thrive, and where I could contribute something meaningful to the world around me. That's the power of hope. It doesn't ask you to ignore your struggles. It asks you to believe that those struggles don't define you. Hope is what allows you to see beyond the temporary setbacks, to look past the pain, and recognize that the journey you're on is shaping you into someone who can handle whatever comes next. I began to realize that my circumstances, no matter how harsh, didn't determine my worth or my future. They were simply challenges that would help me grow stronger if I allowed them to. For a long time, my dreams seemed out of reach, like distant stars that I could see but could never touch. But hope is what transformed those dreams from something far off into something real. It was the belief that no matter how many obstacles lay in my way, I could push through them. Hope gave me the courage to keep moving forward, step by uncertain step, even when I had no idea how things would turn out. It's what told me that as long as I kept going, there was always a chance that things could get better. Hope is also what allowed me to trust in my resilience, even when everything around me seemed to be crumbling. I didn't have all the answers, and I didn't know exactly what the future would hold, but I knew that hope would give me the strength to figure it out along the way. It didn't require perfection, just persistence, the belief that if I kept pushing forward, I would eventually find a way. What I've learned is that hope is a choice. It's not something that's given to you or granted by your circumstances. It's something you create within yourself. In a place where so many others had lost their hope, I had to make the conscious decision to hold on to mine. And when you make that choice, you start to see the world differently. You begin to notice opportunities where others only see obstacles. You begin to recognize your own potential, even when it feels like the world is trying to convince you otherwise. Hope isn't just a feeling, it's an action. It's the commitment to move forward, no matter how small the steps might be. It's about finding that next step, and then the one after that. I began to see that hope was something that needed to be nurtured, watered, and grown over time. And the more I cultivated hope, the more I began to see the possibility of a different life. A life where I could break free from the cycle of violence and limitation that had defined so much of my life. Hope helped me believe in the possibility of transformation. It told me that my past didn't have to define my future, that the violence and fear I grew up with weren't the only things that could shape my identity. Hope gave me the courage to choose differently, to choose to break free from the constraints of my environment and create something better. And in doing so, it gave me a purpose, a reason to keep going. Hope is the spark that keeps the fire of your dreams burning. It's the invisible force that pushes you forward, even when the road is tough. It tells you that no matter how dark the night seems, the sun will rise again. And that's what allowed me to keep going, because I truly believed that on the other side of all the pain and struggle, there was a life waiting for me. A life that would allow me to finally tap into my potential and create a future of my own design. Chapter 8. It's a journey. The lessons I learned in the streets, the strength, the resilience, the determination, are the same lessons that have carried me forward into the rest of my life. These weren't lessons that came wrapped in neat packages or from the pages of a self-help book. They came from the raw, unfiltered reality of living in a place where danger was a constant companion, where every decision carried weight, and where survival often felt like the only goal. But even in that environment, something extraordinary was forged in me. Through all the pain, the loss, and the hardship, I learned to develop a mindset that was about thriving despite the circumstances. The streets taught me what it truly means to be strong. It's not just about physical toughness or the ability to take hits. It's about the mental strength that carries you through when the world seems determined to break you. It's about holding on to your dignity, even when everything around you tries to strip it away. The strength, I learned, was a shield against hopelessness. I had to teach myself that no matter what the world throws at you, you can always choose how you respond. And then there was resilience. Resilience is something you can't fake. It's built over time, piece by piece, through every hardship you endure. I learned to bounce back, to keep moving forward when everything seemed to be pulling me backward. When you live in a place where loss is frequent, you learn quickly that you can't stay down for long. There is no room for self-pity when survival is on the line. Resilience wasn't just a lesson I learned, it became a habit. A muscle I had to flex every time life knocked me down. But perhaps the most valuable lesson of all was determination. I learned to keep going, no matter how dark the path ahead seemed, no matter how impossible the goal appeared. It was the kind of determination that pushed me through long nights of uncertainty and days filled with doubt. I didn't always know how I was going to make it out of the mess I was in, but I knew one thing: I was not going to stay stuck. I understood that the key to getting through the chaos was to keep moving forward, one small step at a time. Every tiny action I took was a victory, and each victory, no matter how small, was proof that I was capable of more than my environment had ever told me I could be. Those lessons from the streets became the foundation upon which I built everything else in my life. They shaped my approach to every challenge, every opportunity, and every dream I pursued. I realized that life isn't about having all the answers or the perfect plan. It's about having the courage to take the next step, even when you can't see where it leads. It's about learning to walk in faith, even when you're unsure. I can't count the number of times the doubt tried to pull me back into the comfort of what was familiar. But through it all, I kept pushing forward. So I pushed forward, step by step, day by day. And as I did, I discovered that the pain of my past no longer controlled me. It became the fuel that drove me to be better, to do better, and to show others that it's possible to rise above the struggles you face. I wasn't just surviving, I was learning, growing, and evolving into someone who could create a future worth living. It's about trusting the process, trusting yourself, and trusting that each step, each moment of courage, adds up to something much bigger than you realize in the moment. This isn't just a motivational speech or some empty promise, it's the truth. We all have within us the capacity to rise above our circumstances. The toughest environments are where you learn the most about your true strength. And those lessons, learned in the hardest of times, are the ones that will serve you long after the storm has passed. The best version of yourself is waiting for you. It's not a distant dream. It's not something that only exists in the future, far beyond the reach of your struggles. It's not something that's reserved for the lucky or the privileged. The best version of yourself is already inside you. It's the version of you that has been shaped by every challenge, every setback, every moment of doubt, and every act of perseverance. It's the version of you that refuses to accept defeat and pushes forward. It's a journey, and you're already on it. You don't have to have all the answers. What matters is that you're moving forward, step by step. What matters is that you're choosing to rise even when you don't feel like it. What matters is that you believe, deep down, that no matter where you come from or what you've been through, you have the power to create the life you've always dreamed of. The lessons I learned in the streets were the foundation of everything I've achieved, and they continue to guide me every single day. You need to believe in yourself enough to take the first step, and then the next. Keep going, and trust that the person you're becoming is worthy of the life you desire.